Lions and Matthew Stafford have essentially agreed to part ways. The ownership and Matthew Stafford met over the weekend, and they have mutually decided that they are going to part ways. And I am so excited for Matthew Stafford. I think Matthew Stafford is one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the league today. I think that potentially with a couple of more playoff wins, his championship appearances, and hopefully for him a Super Bowl appearance, he will end up being a Hall of Fame quarterback one day. He's certainly got the rest of the criteria down. Multiple 4,000-yard passing seasons, one of 8 quarterbacks to actually have a 5,000-yard passing season. We'll get into all of that eventually, but I am super excited for Matthew Stafford to finally be rid of the Detroit Lions franchise. It's fantastic for him. I think he's an underrated quarterback, and now that the teams have officially decided to part ways, he's going to get a fresh opportunity with a new team. And I've actually already made a video on which team I think is the best fit for Stafford. It is my Phillip Rivers retired video. You can go and search for that on YouTube. But for those of you who are going to maybe want to be spared the click, I think that the Colts are probably the best destination for Matthew Stafford, and I think that the Colts should do everything in their power to trade for Matthew Stafford. But the point of conversation for this specific topic is specifically how the Lions have managed to waste a potential Hall of Fame quarterback. And for all of you Lions fans out there, this is going to not be pleasant. This is going to be an expose on how awful the franchise has been recently. And by recently, I mean pretty much the entire way through the franchise's lifespan, but specifically from the point that Matthew Stafford was drafted to now, how the Lions have somehow managed to waste a potential Hall of Fame quarterback's career with bad coaching, bad drafting, and just really bad support for the quarterback throughout Matthew Stafford's 12-year career in Detroit. Now, I'm not normally a stats person. It's not that I don't acknowledge stats. I'll use stats in my arguments, but I'm more of a logical, explain, talk it out kind of guy. I'm not the type of guy to just take a look at the stats and read the stats straight from my computer, straight from my notebook. I'm never that type of person to just read stats cold-handedly to try and prove my point, but I'm going to do that today because when I was looking up stats to write down for this specific topic today, I was absolutely blown away by the things that I found. I didn't think it was going to be this bad, but oh boy, it is going to be this bad. So strap yourselves in, ladies and gentlemen, grab some popcorn, make sure your seatbelts are on. And again, to all you Lions fans out there, I'm extremely sorry for the pain that I'm about to regurgitate for you. I'm sure this is not going to be pleasant, but regardless of that, here we go. Now, a disclaimer, all of these stats that I'm about to present to you are going to be from Pro Football Reference, which I believe to be extremely accurate and probably one of the best sports referencing sites for professional football that there is. I think it's probably the predominant one. But regardless of that, all these stats have been collected through Pro Football Reference. The Lions really have wasted Matthew Stafford. In 165 games, Matthew Stafford has a 62.6% completion rating. He has passed for 45,109 yards, 282 touchdowns, 144 interceptions. He's had 8 individual 4,000-yard passing seasons. He's had one 5,000-yard passing season, and he is one of 8 NFL quarterbacks to ever do it. Some of the names that he joins on that list: Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Patrick Mahomes. So very good company, especially in recent memory when it comes to quarterbacks on that list. And he's had, for the most part, an extremely durable career. He's only missed 27 games in his entire career, and he started every single game for the Detroit Lions over an 8-year span between 2011 to 2018. Now, whether or not you think that Matthew Stafford is a Hall of Fame quarterback, that's up to you. I think he has the potential to be a Hall of Fame quarterback. I'm going to say he's a Hall of Fame quarterback for the sake of this segment. Obviously, if he has a couple of more playoff wins, because he actually doesn't have a single playoff win. He's lost all 3 of his playoff appearances, but I don't attribute that to Matthew Stafford. I definitely attribute that to the Detroit Lions. Matthew Stafford, if he gets a chance with whatever team that he is going to, I hope that he has the chance to win a couple of playoff games, maybe go to AFC or NFC championship game, and potentially a Super Bowl. That would definitely bolster the resume. It wouldn't be the first time that at the end of Matthew Stafford's career, if he doesn't have a Super Bowl victory, he doesn't have all those playoff wins, it wouldn't be the first time that those types of quarterbacks have been let into the Hall of Fame. Dan Marino, a Hall of Fame quarterback, doesn't have a Super Bowl ring, so it's not out of the ordinary, but even in 12 seasons, and, keep in mind, Matthew Stafford is 33, so he does have about 4 or 5 more seasons, technically sliding out of his prime, but he does have more seasons in his prime. He's got a lot more work he's going to do a lot more work in the next coming years or so. But with that stat line by itself, Matthew Stafford is definitely one of the better quarterbacks in the league. I think he's woefully underrated, and part of the reason is because the Detroit Lions have been perennially one of the worst teams in the league, apart from a pair of playoff appearances. So, in Matthew Stafford's 12 years as a starter, and this is where we're going to kind of just go full pan reading of the notes here, and I'm going to hit you with some cold hard facts. Again, I'm not normally a fan of me just sitting here and reading off my notes instead of talking to you, directly to you, explaining my position, but here we go. In Matthew Stafford's 12 years as a starter, he has been one of the top 10 most sacked quarterbacks. Again, that is one of the top 10 most sacked quarterbacks in the NFL in 7 of Matthew Stafford's 12 years as a starter. So 7 out of the 12 seasons, he's been a top 10 most sacked quarterback. He was the 21st most sacked quarterback his rookie season, and that's when he only played 10 games. Easily, he could have been in the top 10 in sacks that year if he played every single game, and he only played 3 games his second year. I believe 2012, 2013, and 2019 were the other 3 years that he wasn't in the top 10 for most sacked quarterbacks. I believe one year he was tied for 15th, so he's always been around that ballpark, definitely in the top 20 for pretty much his entire career. But for the sake of the topic, I narrowed it down to top 10. He has played 8 straight seasons and so the 8 straight seasons being from 2011 to 2018. 8 straight season, and he was a top 10 sack QB in 6 of those 8 seasons and was a top 10 sack quarterback in 5 straight seasons. Let me read that again. He was one of the top 10 most sacked quarterbacks in 5 straight seasons between 2014 and 2018. And you can say, well, Matthew Stafford was throwing the ball a lot. The Lions have never had a really good running game this decade, as we'll get into. But you can acknowledge that point. But curiously enough, the 3 years that he threw the ball the most in his career was in 2011, 2012, and 23. And only in 2011 was that a year in which he was not a top 10, he was a top 10 sack quarterback. So in 2012 and 2013, he was not in the top 10 sack quarterback. 2011 was the only year out of the 3 years in which he threw the ball the most. In addition to that, Matthew Stafford has only had one 1,000-yard rusher in his time with the Detroit Lions. If anybody wants to take a guess, I'll give you a couple seconds to guess who that actually is. No cheating, no looking it up. That 1,000-yard rusher was Reggie Bush in the 2013 season. Other than Reggie Bush, the next closest rusher to the 1,000-yard mark that the Lions have had since Matthew Stafford has been the starting quarterback was Joique Bell. Some people are definitely going, who the heck is that? But Lions fans, I'm sure you have an inkling of who that is. Next closest guy to Reggie Bush, Joique Bell in the 2014 season with 860 rushing yards. You might say, well, that's a little strict. It's difficult to have a 1,000-yard rusher in the NFL, and I agree. But apart from Joique Bell and Reggie Bush, there was only 2 other players that rushed for more than 700 yards in a season with Matthew Stafford as the starting quarterback. That's Michael LeSure in 2012 and Kevin Smith in 2009. So 4 out of the 12 years, Stafford has had a running back rush for more than 700 yards on a season. That is certainly not a good running game. That definitely puts a load on Matthew Stafford. And even with the load being predominantly on Matthew Stafford, he has managed to have, again, 8 individual 4,000-yard rushing seasons and a 5,000-yard rushing season, which is absolutely incredible that you have that much passing and you're able to perform that well with it. Now, with that being said, the one thing that the Lions have actually done a really good job of supplying Matthew Stafford with is wide receivers. That's pretty much the only thing that they've done well. Stafford has always had a lot of people to throw to. Calvin Johnson, Golden Tate, Nate Burleson, Anquan Bolden, Brandon Pettigrew, Eric Ebron, Marvin Jones, Kenny Golladay. Those names are probably the ones that you would be the most familiar with. So, moving on to the defensive side of things. In Stafford's 12 seasons with the Lions, the Lions have had a top 10 defense only once. That season was the 2014 season when the Lions went 11-5 and lost in the wild card round to a Tony Romo-led Cowboys team. And if you remember, that was probably Tony Romo's best year as a quarterback. I think he had like 34 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, around 3,700 passing yards. A really good season for Tony Romo. That was actually the last season that Tony Romo played mostly in full before Dak Prescott took over the starting job. Oh, and by the way, that 2014 season, which was probably Stafford's best year with the Lions, not necessarily in terms of numbers, but in terms of where they got to in the playoffs, again, losing in the wildcard round, that's about as far as they ever got, but that was the most promising year, and that was the first year under Jim Caldwell. By the way, that 2014 season with the Lions, Stafford, the one that Stafford had the best defense, I believe they were number 2 and number 3 ranked in points and yards. That was the season that he was the fourth most sacked quarterback in the NFL. He was sacked 48 times in the 2014 season. So even with a strong defense, the offensive line for the Detroit Lions completely impaired Matthew Stafford's ability to have an effective go any further than the wild card round. And sure, he would have had a good season, but getting sacked 48 times in the NFL is a lot. Fourth most sacked quarterback in the NFL that year. Now, I'm not really a math person, but when putting all the numbers together in terms of the defense for the Lions over the past 12 seasons, the Lions on average had the 21st best defense in the NFL over Stafford's career, so perennially a subpar defense. This last season, the Lions had the worst defense in the league, ranked 32nd in both points allowed and yards allowed, with a supposed defensive coach in Matt Patricia. Oh, and the Lions also had the worst defense in football Stafford's rookie season as well, ranked 32nd in all those categories during his rookie season. So it's kind of funny. Stafford starting off with having the worst defense in the NFL, ends his career with the Lions with the worst defense in the NFL, and you can absolutely argue that for as great as Matthew Stafford is underrated as Matthew Stafford has been, he has essentially found himself exactly back to square one with the franchise. And speaking of coaches, like we just did with Matt Patricia, Stafford has had 3 different head coaches, 4 different offensive coordinators, which isn't an insane amount, but 3 head coaches specifically is trending towards the higher side. Jim Schwartz, who went 29-51 as a head coach with 1 playoff appearance, but was extremely inconsistent. He had 6 different losing streaks of 4 games or more, including 2 6-game losing streaks and 1 8-game losing streak, which that's a lot of inconsistent losing right there. Then there's Jim Caldwell, who was the first quarterback to leave the team with a winning record since Joe Schmidt in the 1960s and early 1970s. And Jim Caldwell, a lot of people retrospectively will argue that he was probably the best coach for the Lions, and if they gave Jim Caldwell a little bit more time, he could have done a little bit more with that franchise. But then an executive from the Patriots came over, his name is escaping me, and of course the Lions hired Matt Patricia, who posted a 13-29 record as a coach, but he seemed very apathetic, uninterested, and as a head coach, the team massively regressed under him. So, if all of that wasn't enough to support the argument that the Lions have completely wasted Matthew Stafford and the talent and gave him a lack of talent around him, horrible defense, subpar running game, and a horrible offensive line consistently, if all that wasn't enough, let's talk about the drafting. Since 2009, the Lions have drafted 8 Pro Bowlers, and there were others that were drafted by the Lions that didn't have Pro Bowl seasons with the Lions. We'll get into that as well. But 8 Pro Bowlers drafted since 2009 that had Pro Bowl seasons while they were with the Detroit Lions. These are names that you will recognize. Ndamukong Suh, Darius Slay, Kenny Galladay, TJ Hawkinson, Ezekiel Ansah, Frank Ragnow, and Matthew Stafford. Those are the 8 Pro Bowlers since 2009 that the Lions have drafted. You may be thinking, well, what about Calvin Johnson? Calvin Johnson was almost perennially a Pro Bowler with the Detroit Lions. Calvin Johnson was actually drafted in 2008, so he doesn't count for this specific stat category. I did not include, as I said earlier, I did not include players that were Pro Bowlers that the Lions drafted, but they had their Pro Bowl years with other teams. And these players are Eric Ebron, who had a Pro Bowl season with the Colts, Larry Warford, who had a Pro Bowl season with the Saints, and Quandre Diggs, who had a Pro Bowl season this past season with the Seattle Seahawks. So if you want to count those people in, there's also a punter and a kicker. Matt Prater was a Pro Bowler one year, and Jason Fox, who's the punter, was a Pro Bowler this year as well. In total, since 2009, there have been 14 Pro Bowlers for the Detroit Lions since 2009. And if you want to know how many draft selections the Lions have had since 2009, they've had pretty much all of their draft picks every single season. The Lions have had 96 draft selections since 2009. And with 8 Pro Bowlers being drafted in that time, that puts their percentage for hitting on draft picks, that puts their percentage at a whopping, mind-shattering 8%. The Lions have hit on 8% of their draft picks when trying to draft Pro Bowlers, and if you want to include those who were drafted by the Lions but went to have a Pro Bowl season on another team, then that average raises by a massive amount to 11%. I'm not really a statistician. Obviously, I have an English degree. I'm not a math person, but in my rudimentary math, this is what I was able to make out. I don't have time to look up the numbers for every team. I would be sitting here forever. So comparing these numbers to other teams is very hard, but at first glance, and maybe with a pinch of salt added for good measure, these numbers are really poor. So after that laundry list of notes and stats, it's very hard for me to say that the Detroit Lions did not waste Matthew Stafford. They absolutely did. Horrible defense, horrible offensive line, inconsistent coaching, bad drafting, and Matthew Stafford is still given everything to that franchise. He's given everything to that city. He wanted to bring a Super Bowl to Detroit so badly, and that franchise was just never enabling enough to give Matthew Stafford what he needed to have some long-term success. So wherever he goes, and again, I've already made a video about that, you should definitely go watch that. Wherever he goes, Matthew Stafford will more than likely instantly make that team a playoff contender, a strong playoff contender, and I wish nothing but the best for Matthew Stafford. I think him getting out of the Detroit Lions franchise will be the best thing for him in his career, but he's already had one heck of a career already, but just because he's been on the Detroit Lions, and as I've just shown you, they've never enabled him properly, he's never really had the appreciation that he deserves. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching this segment from the Hard Headed Sports Podcast. You've heard what I've had to say, now I'm interested to hear what you think as well. If you enjoyed this highlight from the show and want to watch more highlights from the show as they come out after the show's completion, you should definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel, and if you're interested in listening to the entire show in its full-length entirety, you should follow the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you all very soon.